better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. Today's episode will be a debate on veganism, no less. Is veganism a moral obligation? This person seems to think that it is not. So I'm going to have a discussion and a debate with them, and hopefully we will reach some sort of, make some sort of headway in this. Obviously, there's no guarantee of how debates happen and how they'll turn out, but this debate will be on Arthuria, a debate server on Discord, which you can check out in the description below. They offer moderation in debates, and there will be moderation in this debate. So if you hear people moderating the debate, you'll understand why. So let's get into it.
Okay, so
Oof, I don't know what that was. Right. Okay. Let's see. Okay. That's working. Right. Just gonna let them know I'm ready. All right. Cool. Okay.
Hi guys, let me quick give the announcement that there's a debate happening and then we can get starting.
Yeah, no problem. Can you hear us okay?
yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
brilliant. That's
we can
brilliant.
hear you. Yeah,
That's brilliant. Thank you for the debate. Obviously, thanks for hosting. And obviously for the moderation and everything. It's really appreciated. And just to let everyone know, we are live on my channel now. Just so you know.
Okay, so let's get this started. Welcome everyone to today's debate. It will be between Moliant and Perspective Philosophy. Moliantic is taking the position that veganism and the actions entailing veganism are not and never have been moral obligations. Perspective Philosophy is taking the opposition. To both competitors, good luck.
Okay.
Okay. Can I just I think I'd just like to adjust. I think I'd kind of move to an agnostic claim. I'm agnostic as to whether there is a moral obligation or if there is not a moral obligation.
Right. So how would you manage to like I guess the issue is then really it's obviously a very big shift. Obviously saying something is not and never has been a moral obligation versus saying that you're indifferent to the idea of a moral obligation is a different obviously statement to make. So what would you say was your actual position, and then we'll try and outline what we're arguing so that it's clear, clear as day, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, no worries. Look, I guess I'd just be agnostic as to whether any moral obligations exist at all.
Right. Okay. That's fair enough. And so meta-ethics. Okay. And is there a reason specifically that you chose the topic of veganism?
No, not necessarily.
Oh, right. So it's just so you don't see a differentiation between animals and humans that gives any rise to a difference in obligation to one or the other.
Sorry, I'm not following. I don't
So
know. I'm not following. What did you ask?
so like what I'm asking is there a reason that you would have taken the position about animals in relation to veganism, that we would not be obligated to animals, but would be obligated to humans if moral obligations did exist? Is there a reason that you would argue for that?
No, look, I don't think we're obligated to serve humans in any way and I also don't think we're obligated to serve animals in any way.
Right, serve them. Do you mean
Yeah.
like do you mean on a plate, or do you mean like
No, I think no. I'm talking morally. So I don't think there would be a difference between, for example, like punching an animal in the face and punching a human in the face.
and you consider that servitude? So you'd say that was you are
In
servile
a
by not punching someone in the face.
in a sense, I would call it. So I don't want to be semantic. I don't want this to be semantic.
Well, I
I
mean, I
think
just want to be specific because I think if you're making a point when you say serving, it seems to me that you're saying that there is a power differential there, that you are sacrificing your power towards another individual when you consider them as with equal consideration. You see, what I would say is actually the inclusion of other individuals is empowering in terms of the expression of our freedom. So it has relevance in considering our obligations to ourselves even.
Okay, I'm unsure what kind of criticism you're trying to give me right now.
It's not a criticism. I'm just wondering, like, if you mean the word servitude, because you said servitude, like you said serve. It obviously it points to me towards the idea of power. You know, like if you're a moral servant, then you are, you are being controlled in some way. Now that's relevant in relation to the meta-ethical argument I'm going to make. So is there a reason that you're saying, serving another? Is there a specific reason that you take in that position, or is it just the word that you decided to use? So they could it be replaced with something like considering? Would that be synonymous in this scenario?
Yeah, thanks for the donation, by the way. Look,
it
look,
wasn't. It
look.
wasn't a
I
donation. It was a
don't.
follow.
Right. I don't think I'm saying any of that at all. I'm not even sure you're trying to. Well, like, what are you trying to ask me?
One second. I'm just gonna mute
James
that.
Heller donated.
Yeah, cool. Right. Okay. Okay. So what I'm trying to ask is whether you meant anything in particular by using the word serve. That's all. Like, was there a reason that you chose that word? That's all I'm asking.
Look. I guess all I meant was like treatment.
Okay.
Um,
It's just because a lot of people usually in terms of ethics, see, I understand that, like, I don't know how much ethics you've studied or engaged with, but a lot of people consider power relationships and ethics to be vitally important. And some people talk about moral servitude.
okay. I don't think I look. I don't think that concept was invoked. All I'm really seeking. Um, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this debate. Thank you for attending, by the way. All I'm really seeking is why, like, why would I have a moral obligation to avoid eating animals?
Okay, that's something I can answer. I would say that for the expression of your own subjectivity. So I would say that ultimately everyone is being urged towards action in relation to their own subjectivity. We're all, individuals with our own desires, and that those desires and that the proper understanding of those desires is only possible when we consider a universal. And that universal, one second, I'm going to have to mute that. That's going to do my head in. Thank you for the follows, guys. I really do appreciate it. I thought I just turned that off. Okay. So the reason I would say that you can only talk about a universal is because of the way language works and the way that we understand ourselves. It's like it's actually trolling us now. It's like, I swear to God. One second. If I can just turn that off, it's going to just...
Yeah, look,
Okay. That should...
just to reinforce, I do want to like bolster that. I'm hoping this is going to lead to why there is an obligation as to why I should not eat animals.
Yeah. Yeah, basically, I would say that you have an obligation in relation to sentience and this expression of subjectivity itself. And then, and then it doesn't matter what I do. I can't... Oh, wait a minute. Okay. All right. There we go. Right. Okay. So I'd say you have an obligation towards the expression of your own subjectivity, well, actually subjectivity itself. And I would say that the reason you have that is it's embedded in your nature that you have an action urging process which moves you to try and express desire in the greatest way possible. And animals must be considered in that for you to be rational. Now, I can give like a breakdown of
So this
why.
is hold on, can we just pause for a second? So this is your argument. Can we just lay it out premise by like premise conclusion?
I'm not going to write a syllogism. No.
No, look,
I can have a.
I'll write it out myself. And we can just lay it out. Premise, and then conclusion.
Yeah, that's fine.
So
Okay.
what's the first premise?
Okay. All individuals seek to express their desires. Or desire, whichever.
Okay.
Okay.
Second premise.
Okay.
First premise is all individuals seek to express their desires.
Yes.
Do you see the problem with that
No.
premise? Well, we could take someone. Are you on the Ask Yourself server, for example?
No, because that would be me deliberately inhibiting my desires.
Look, I don't know what you're trying to say there. I'm just gonna grab a link from there.
It was
Hold
a
on.
joke. It was a joke. Me saying that. No, I'm not. I wouldn't
Okay.
want to be. I wouldn't want to be on Ask Yourself server. It's not the
Uh,
debate format for me.
okay. Look, that's a good joke. I appreciate that. I'll just post in debate. I'll just post in debate chat a link from one of their bots. Do you think that Bree hold on. Do you think that Bree seeks to express her desires?
Yes,
I've posted in now. How have you inferred that that's the case?
because that individual has positive and negative relationships within the world, and reacts in relation to that positive and negative stimuli.
Can you give me an example of a positive or negative relationship that she experiences?
One second, I can just smell fire. So,
Oh, dude, you better check it out. Just run outside and have a look.
oh no, it's okay. It's all right. It was just, it's someone burning something. It's okay. Um, I made it straight myself. Okay. I would say that your desires not to feel like she would recoil at physical abuse, for example. Recoil in pain in relation to, like being burnt or something like that, physical pain. I would say that she probably has emotional needs that are, varying in complexity in relation to our psychological state. For those of you who don't know, like he's posted a disabled individual. I can't tell our condition based on obviously observation. I don't know what our mental states are capable of, and what she's capable of as an individual.
Okay. No, so it sounds like you're starting it off with like you're making a claim about how she feels, but then it sounds like you're finishing it off with I don't know how Brie feels. I don't know how. So I guess look, I guess I'll be
No,
charitable and I'll say
uh,
I guess I'll be charitable and I'll I guess I'll be charitable and I'll say like I guess I'll be charitable. I'll just say like you're just agnostic as to how she feels. You don't really know.
no, I know that you can feel pain and pleasure in relation to our actions. I think that is fundamental to all conscious sentient creatures, and regardless of our disability, I don't think there is any reason to understand her as
Okay.
being incapable of having conscious sensation.
Mm. Okay, I get look this I think this is just secondary. So that was
How would
your
that be
first
secondary?
premise. No, just in relation to your syllogism that you're giving. I'm writing out for you.
Oh,
So your first premise is that all individuals seek to something they desire. What was it?
express their desires.
Right. Um, I guess it's just semantic. Like obviously not every single individual. Like obviously we agree there. We don't even have to clarify. What's the second premise?
So you agree with the first premise? Okay. The second premise is that the expression of the.
No, no, hold on. I don't agree with the first. I'm being charitable. I'm saying
Okay.
obviously not every single
I'm not trying
individual
to get a got you here.
seeks
I'm
to.
just trying to understand whether you.
I'm look. Just think logically. Obviously, not every
Oh,
single
just
individual
think logically.
seeks to express their desires. Like, for example, take someone who's fucking quadriplegic, can't even move their arms, their eye, their like head or their body. They can't really express their desire. It's not like every single individual could express their
But
desires.
there's a difference between being incapable of doing it and having the desires and the desire to express them. So, like having the action urging process, like even if you are, incapable of movement, you may desire to move, for example. You may look to the time in which you did move and wish that you could move. Like, just
Right.
because you can't
And even
express.
even look, even granting that, how would that kind of a person who couldn't move any part of their body, how could they express their
I
desires?
said seeks to express their desires.
But now you're just moving the goalpost
No, I'm
because
not.
your initial premise was all individuals seek to express their desires.
Yes, that's exactly what I just said again.
But do you have access to the intentions of, like, say, a paralyzed individual?
I would say that there are certain intentional states that we could place upon them, and I think that there are other states in which would be encompassed in the universal of, in which we would understand humans in general. So we would understand, for example, that human beings.
Well, you're just not answering my question.
Yeah,
I'm
I do.
asking you,
I do.
do you have access? Do you have access to the intentional states of, like, a completely paralyzed person?
Um, Not necessarily. It depends. It depends. I mean, like private access to.
Then how would you know that um that this completely paralyzed person seeks to express their desires?
Because that individual can only be understood in reference to the universal, which is their humanity. So they are a paralyzed human. The fact that you know that they're paralyzed in the first place implies that you're already encompassing the concept of humanity to them to say that they should be able to walk. It's a functional concept. So understanding that concept in relation to that humanity implies a certain interests on part of the patient.
You're just giving me gibberish. You haven't really offered a argument. You're just giving me complete
Okay. I'll
gibberish.
try and say that again a bit slower. So, um, the individual who is paralyzed, our understanding of that individual, even to say that they are paralyzed, implies that we have attributed a concept of humanity to them. Okay, that we understand a basic fundamental nature in relation to what they are. So rather than saying like someone is paralyzed, like there is a difference between someone who is paralyzed and someone who is dead, for example. And we know that in terms of the state of being in which they are. So ontologically, that means the study of being, we have already attributed a concept which lets us understand them in a way that expresses functions. Individuals who walk, for example, are not considered paralyzed. And the reason for that is because we would
Okay,
attribute.
I don't.
No, I'll just express it. The reason that we attribute that, not being, well, the reason that we don't say that someone it can't like necessarily is not paralyzed is because we take it as part of the concept of humanity, the function of a average, individual to be that capable of walking. So when we say that someone is paralyzed, we've applied the concept of humanity, but then applied contingently the concept of paralyzation. Do you see what I mean? So the only reason that we can say that they are paralyzed in the first place is by saying that there is a function within them that has been frustrated, i.e., the capacity of movement.
Okay, look. I don't think you're answering the question, because my question is, do you have access to the intentions of this person that's paralyzed?
No, I can't access their individual
Then
intentions.
how then then how could you know that they seek um to express or actualize. I'm
because
just going to say express.
because they're
How do you,
human.
how can you know that?
Because they're human.
Sorry, how okay? So how would it follow from being? How would it necessarily follow from being human that a human would seek to express their desires?
Because the concept of humanity includes a function in relation to the expression of desires. We know that humans are sentient and tries to express desires. They have pain and pleasure responses. They have action urging processes, and that is atypical of a human. Unless we can say that there is something that we contingently apply to that. For example, the human is brain dead or in a coma, in a comatose state, which is actually that wouldn't even. I think it would have to be brain dead. Then yeah, would say that the individual is sentient and so is trying to express desire.
All right, look, well, let's just back up for a second.
Yeah, okay.
Why does it necessarily follow that that because somebody is a human that it necessarily why is it that it necessarily follows that they seek to express their desires?
Because the concept of humanity includes the action urging process of desire, is what I would say. And I would also say that if you want to express if you want to talk about how we
I don't know
understand
what that
humans,
is.
well, the concept of humanity.
I don't look, no.
You don't understand the concept of humanity.
Well, I don't understand how that would be an informative argument as to why it would always necessarily follow that a human would necessarily express their desires in virtue of them being human.
Well, I think that what follows from it is unless there is a contingent concept being applied, then the human attempts to express their desires. So, like, unless the human is brain dead, for example.
I'm not seeing an argument here. You're saying that in virtue of the fact that they're human, they necessarily seek to express their desires.
Yeah.
You haven't provided a
okay.
sufficient argument for that.
What I'm saying is that an understanding of what it means to be human, right, includes an understanding of desire in relation to one another, in which we attribute with each okay. The way you want to be taken.
What if the individual does not have an understanding of what it means to be human?
Well, that's.
Would they still express?
Well, yes, I don't think
Would
their
they still
understanding
express
of their
desire?
understanding of being human is different from being human. That is like foundationally different, foundationally separate. So the expression of like their humanity is what they are.
Sorry, look. Are you going to provide an argument for why it would necessarily follow that being human would necessarily entail an expression of desire?
Okay, so what you want to know is why I think humans have desire. Like why they have desires.
Well, you've claimed that being human necessarily entails an expression of desire.
Yeah.
I'm just asking you, what's the argument for that?
Okay, right. Let's make this simple. Let's define human. Shall we define human?
Well, that's just ad hoc. I think we'd agree on what human is.
Do we?
What do you think a human is?
Okay, so I would say that a human is actually how shall we define human? This is actually going to be because I don't want to presuppose anything without justification. So
well, look, as soon as we clear up this bullshit tangent, I'm just seeking for you to explain why it would follow that simply that being human necessarily entails an expression of desire. So don't forget that.
I'm not forgetting it. Don't worry. I'm very much keeping up.
And I'm sure that we agree on what a human is. So what do you think a human is?
Okay, so I think it's a member of the Homo sapien species. Okay, I think we can agree on that. Okay,
yeah.
And that species is a kind of animal which interacts with the world in an attempt to express certain functions in relation to in relation to certain behavior. So humans, by definition, are mammals. They are they seek, food, water, shelter, in relation to avoiding pain and pleasure, which is not only directly observable but experienceable by an individual. I'm a human. I know that I seek to avoid pain and seek pleasure. And I would say that an understanding of these functions in the first place was the only way that we could have divested humanity from other kinds of animal, from other kinds of being, because those functions are metaphysically related to the individuals of that species and the way in which they behave. So humans, for example, seek sex to reproduce, whilst bacteria, split through was it mitosis? So understanding that there is a function in relation to humanity, and understanding that humans are animals, and the concept of animals, I would argue, implies a concept of consciousness and applies a concept of subjectivity. Now, we can debate that, and that's where I think you probably want to go, but so far what I'm arguing is that subconscious, subjective agents who are in relation to their species have certain functions, and that unless we have reason to believe that the individual, that the particular, is not an atypical expression of a universal concept, such as humanity, such as animal, such as subjective agent,
Yeah.
then we would attribute those functions to that individual. So we would say, look, the atypical flower blooms. Okay, and that's what we would say was atypical about. And to be a flower would entail blooming. Now, if there was a flower, for some reason, it had like certain, attributes, which meant it didn't bloom, we would say that it's a
Yeah.
flower, but it does not bloom. And we would attribute a secondary concept to that. Okay, now, are you following?
That's insane. I've never thought about it like that. You might think this is too oversimplified when I say this, but all I'm really asking you for is it would be why it would be necessarily entailed from like being human that that we would necessarily that we would necessarily want to actualize our desires.
Okay, because I would say that.
You haven't really answered the question, and you haven't really provided an argument for the question. You've just rambled about some random shit.
Oh, really? I think, to be entirely honest with you, if I'm honest, I think that you're struggling to keep up, and I'm going really slow. And so
Yeah, you're going very slow.
I'm trying for you. I really am. And I swear I'm normally really nice, but this is starting to annoy us. So what I'm trying to say here, if I may, okay, is that humans necessarily seek to express their desires because to be considered human necessarily entails the expression of desire, and the understanding of a human without desire would imply a concept which was not human. So I will ask you, describe a human without a secondary. Describe humans that do not have. Describe what it means to be human, okay, without expressing functionality, without expressing their action-urging processes which move them towards given ends.
Yeah, look, we'll just back it up, because whether or not say 100% of people consider humans to be it doesn't necessarily entail that humans would be A. Do you understand that?
Yes, what we would say is that there was enough evidence to say that they are A.
Then it just seems like you're appealing to like popularity.
No, that's exactly what I just said. Did you not hear us say that it's like the fittingness of the concept, right? That there is enough evidence to say that humans do feel desire, unless you're arguing that humans don't feel desire.
There's enough evidence in virtue of what?
In relation to either behaviorism or we can go materialism, your choice.
That's not informative. You're not giving me anything informative.
Okay, so in behaviorism, we can see that an individual's action or a behavior is modified by the stimuli around them. That stimuli implies a evaluation of reality. Now, what we also attribute is the understanding of conscious intention, and we do that in relation to behavioral changes in relation to a complex set of stimuli. So an individual doesn't simply react; they are able to problem solve. That's something that we would.
Can we start over? Like, can I call you something else instead of perspective
Yeah,
philosophy?
you could call us Lewis.
Chris
Yeah.
Lewis. Okay, you can call me Don. My name's Don. Um, so Lewis, what I was initially asking for is like just an argument as to why veganism is a moral obligation, and I think I was trying to lay it out like syllogistically, so we have something like on paper, and we can attack and like we can attack it, and we can look at it
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like and see if it's consistent. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it depends. Obviously, natural language arguments are, I would argue, just as valuable as syllogisms. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. So why would you think there's a moral obligation? And if it comes to it, we'll put it in a syllogism.
Okay. So, how much before I get into this and I start using more terminology that I'm worried you mightn't have learned before. How much ethics have you studied? Just so I know how much I can say that's not in layman's terms, and how much I need to break down into layman's terms. So I don't want to go too slow,
Yeah. Just
but I don't want to go.
yeah.
But I don't want to
Look, just
obviously use
assume.
esoteric language.
Yeah, dude. Just assume I'm a layman. Don't. Yeah, I'm a layman.
Okay. Okay. Um. Right. Let's see. Do you want to do this via, rather than doing this like through syllogism? Do you want to try doing this via, I don't know, like maybe Socratically or something, like do pure dialogue. So, um,
Yeah, yeah. If you want to run some kind of Socratic method, I'm totally open for that. Yeah.
okay, okay. So, right, right. How will I? How
Uh,
will we do this?
can
Okay,
can you give me like 30 seconds? Just hold on.
absolutely.
All right. Yeah. No worries. I'm ready. Yep.
Okay. Right. So, okay. Like first thing we need to maybe consider is what is a moral obligation. Um, before we, because you said that that's the reason that you said you're agnostic to the idea of a moral obligation. So,
Yeah. Look. I just don't know what a moral obligation would be. Um.
okay. Okay. So I typically, it's probably not so important for this discussion, but I typically separate morality and ethics in relation to a more
Look.
contingent.
Look. I don't want to lecture. I'm just
Yeah,
asking
I
you
know, I know.
what
Look, I know. I'm not going to
look.
give you a lecture. I'm just
I'm just
saying. I'm just saying for the benefit
oh,
of the chat
sorry,
that I.
Lewis. I'm just asking you directly. What is a moral obligation?
Okay, I would say a moral obligation is concerned with an individual's behavior being justified or unjustified. If it's an obligation, I would say that you ought to do it. That means you should or must do it, otherwise you are necessarily incorrect for not doing it. Okay? That you made a logical error.
Okay. So, correct and incorrect in virtue of what?
Logic.
Let's just take murder for example.
Okay.
Well, not even let's won't even phrase it like that. Like we'll say killing. Like, what would be correct in virtue of killing, and what would be incorrect in virtue of killing?
I mean, it's funny that you decided to take, obviously, I know that the concept of murder is value loaded, but that obviously it's actually what's called a, it's what's called a, what's it, there's a
Well,
specific, wait a minute, hi, wait a minute, hey, wait a minute.
Sorry.
There's a specific, it's called a,
All I'm taking it, all I'm when you say incorrect, all I'm taking to mean is that it's unjustified. And when you say correct, all I'm taking that to mean is that it's justified. Do you think I'm right?
justified and unjustified is, yeah, happy to say.
Yeah, yeah. So when you say like if someone kills someone incorrectly, like say you just said that, like
Well, it wouldn't be that they've killed them incorrectly, that they were incorrect for killing
right?
them.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And so
So we're on the same. Yeah,
okay, so we need to understand obviously what killing is, and I would say that is an action taken by an individual to end the life of another. And I would say that any action, okay, being an action, it implies that it was done for a specific end. Would you agree with that? Like, someone killed someone for a purpose, and it was in relation to trying to modify and change the world for a given conclusion on behalf of the individual who was trying to kill that person. So, like, I don't know, a murderer may try and kill someone for fun, and the goal is their own enjoyment. Or it could be someone in World War II or something being shot at, and the goal may be their own survival. Would you agree that there is always a goal implicit within action?
No, no, because look, I don't think that's the case, because I think there's I don't think there's a contradiction where there would be a case where there is no where there is like a lack of intention, not necessarily like not necessarily like a not necessarily like a void of intention, or like an empty, or like there's no intention, but I think I just don't see a contradiction where there would be a lack of intention, where someone could kill with a lack of intention, and it would still be killing, or like we'll just label it as killing.
Well, like, obviously, I would say that for any action to be understood properly, I would say it implies an intentional state within the agent. Would you disagree with that? So you disagree with that, yeah?
Disagree with what?
The idea of an action implying an intentional state within an agent.
I don't know what you're asking. What I'm saying is that I'm saying I'm saying I'm saying I don't think there's a contradiction where someone could kill and have a lack of intention.
Okay,
I don't think there's a contradiction there.
A lack of intent. You don't think that they could have a lack of intention? So that you would say that their intention was to kill, yeah? And that intention was in relation to, bringing around a certain...
I'm saying that they could be void of intentions and still kill.
Okay, there could be void of intentions and still kill.
Yeah, I don't see a contradiction with that.
Okay. Okay. What would
for example, a contradiction within that circumstance could be like they have an intention to kill, and they also have an intention to not kill, and then that there would be the contradiction that they intend to kill and they also don't intend to kill.
Well, I would say that fundamentally is I would say either impossible, or the individual's intention, it wouldn't be that they were like even void of intention. I would say that an individual could have an intention to kill and then change their mind, or they could have an intention to kill, or not an intention to kill and then accidentally kill. But then I would not say that they could have both an intention in relation to an action, because if they had both the action urging process to do something and not to do something, well, then there would be no mediation between those positions, and the action wouldn't actually occur.
Then you're just moving the goal.
How am I moving a goalpost? I'm trying to understand what you think an action actually is. So if we take it that that the process of acting in the world depends upon, you think it doesn't depend upon an intentional state, which means where would the source?
No, it's not that it doesn't depend on an intentional state. It's that it doesn't necessarily depend on an intentional state.
Okay, and then what would it? Okay, so what would the movement, as in the process from which allows the...
I don't think any of this matters. What I'm really asking you for is why.
But it kind of does matter.
Hold on. What I'm really asking you for is why do we have an obligation to be vegan, to not kill animals.
Okay, and I'm
you
trying to
haven't
talk
provided
about
that.
an understanding of one's own intentional states and subjectivity as being
Fucking hell.
necessary for engagement in ethics, and I can
You're
talk about why.
insufferable.
Look, I'm insufferable, but you struggle to like even understand the most basic concepts. Like I'm not gonna lie, like you wanted to debate, please, for the love of God, even just I don't know, like do a GCSE or something. Anything, just something a little bit more basic than a debate. Like maybe even like watch a lecture or two. Like I don't know, just read. Like I'm sorry to say that, but if you can't understand the most, like for example, if I'm talking about like what is an action, and I ask you what an action is, and you go, well that doesn't matter. Well, that's not a debate, is it? You just every time I try to ask you a question, well, none of this matters. I just want to know the end. I want to understand the entirety of the argument. Well, the entirety of the argument. If I'm trying to explain an argument to you, right, and you can't understand the most fundamental precepts of the argument, then you need to go and learn something before entering a debate. You clearly don't know enough about ethics to debate
But
it.
I want to
though.
know. I want to know. I want to
But I'm
know
not
what
here
the
to teach
argument
you here.
is.
You said I'm not here to lecture you. I'm not here to lecture
I
you.
want to know what
But
the argument is.
I suggest learning a little bit more about ethics before you engage in argumentation.
That's not an argument.
Well, it wasn't meant to be an argument. It was actually it was an
Yeah.
observation.
Okay. So what's the argument that we have a moral obligation to not eat animals?
Okay, let's say we are necessarily obliged to express our own subjectivity, and that the expression of our own subjectivity entails the consideration of subjectivity as a whole, because the only way to understand subjectivity is through engagement into a universal. And you're laughing, but I don't really think you understand like the most basic ethics. Like have you read any ethics?
Look, you're just shifting the goalposts
I'm not
at every
shifting any
single point.
goalposts. I'm not shifting any
At,
goalposts.
at,
I'm not sure if
at
you can
look,
even
every
see a
single time
goalpost
I
at
ask
this
you the
point.
question, every single time I ask you the question, you shift the goalposts.
How have I
It's
shifted the
insane.
goalposts? Look, right. I'm just gonna say this, right?
Okay.
I
So,
think that
let me
like
let me pull up my notes. I said so. So the first, shut the fuck up. We're debating. Shut up, cunt.
Hi. I'm
Hey,
not
I'm
gonna be
the
putting up with.
moderator, so hey, you calm down. I'm the moderator, and
Shut up.
rudeness
Shut
won't
up.
be.
Shut your mouth.
No.
Shut up.
All right,
No,
mate, kick him.
I
Kick
think
him.
we can end this
No.
here.
Yeah, I think we can end this.
We
Yeah.
can end the debate here. As mod and as the moderator, I'm gonna mute Moliantech. I thank all of you for participating in this debate, and that it ended so weirdly is a bit of a yeah. I think we can all agree that PP has won the debate, so to speak. I'll move us all to the Serious Saloon, and we can have a post discussion there.
Yeah, I'll be happy for that. Obviously, I kind of knew that he might very well be a troll, but you know, anti-vegans as they are, you've got to take them in the form they come, which is usually trolls.
Hey, perspective. Oh, I got an echo. That was weird.
Oh God, that is echo. Hi, how you doing?
Sorry, I got cut off. We were getting moved. I'm doing good, man. I'm just like really swamped with work right now. I was watching the stream though, and I just want to say thank you so much for dealing with that. I'm sorry you had to deal with trolls. I mean, that's really what happens when they don't really have a proper argument.
Yeah, it's cool. I appreciate the moderation. That's why I asked for the moderation in the first place. One of the great things about Arthuria is just having someone to step in and go, look, this is clearly not going to work. You're clearly trolling, and sort it out. So yeah, that's why I said like a good amount of moderation would be nice.
Yeah, I was already on my stepping stones there, but you actually handled it yourself, so I thought. I'll keep you a little bit there, and then he overtook the boundaries.
Yeah, I think I'm just glad that obviously it's over now. Really, more than anything, you can only like I would obviously I'm not gonna like do a full on like debate me, bro, scream at someone. I would have just left, but like obviously I didn't want to leave it without letting individuals in the server ask questions and stuff. So yeah, happy to do a Q&A now though if anyone wants to ask anything.
Q&A about the debate. I'm not sure that's going to be like entirely fruitful.
You can ask anything you like. Honestly, anything you like.
Okay.
Anything.
That would be better. Sure. Well, can I ask a question? So I'm going to come out and say I'm a student in computer science. I know very little about ethics, but one thing that did cross my mind when I was talking with a vegan protester, you will, in my town centre, was that one of my professors is a very well established artificial intelligence professor, right? He's written like many studies, and they've been cited thousands of times. He's very well respected in this field, and he told me about this huge step the scientists have made in regards to digitalizing consciousness. And what we've essentially done is we have been researching this type of worm, right? And the species, what was the species called? It's a C. elegans, right? Which is a very simple worm, and we have literally codified every single cell in its body. We understand it better than probably any animal on the planet. Okay. So much so, we know every single neuron and every single motor neuron, every single non-neural neuron, everything in this creature. We understand it to such a degree we have been able to digitalize and completely simulate its actual brain digitally,
which is incredible. Which is incredible, and people are talking about that with humans as well, which is I've heard that before.
But yeah, humans have 100 trillion neural network connections, as opposed to about 1,000 neural networks and 306 neurons like this in this one. My question to you is that does the digital brain itself have the intrinsic value that a consciousness might have?
Okay, so
a physical, like the actual worm, right?
So like, would the worm? So would the artificial simulation have the necessary components in it to actually create consciousness? I'm not gonna lie, I think that goes beyond my capacity to answer, if I'm honest.
Got you.
I think that it probably goes beyond our capacities to answer. I see the only reason that you'll be able to attribute consciousness to the material worm and the simulated worm would be based if there was something about the material itself that gave rise to consciousness that was not within the the simulated worm. What I would say is I usually don't talk about the foundation, like, so I'm not going to say like, I'm not going to argue for like panpsychism.
Sure. I'm
not going to argue anything like that, because I think at the end of the day, we have no like fundamental understanding of where consciousness comes from. I think we've got strong evidence to say that it's connected to a brain.
Yeah, almost definitive.
Yeah, I think that we have, at the same time, not even enough to say that it is emergent from the brain, necessarily either, or reducible rather to the brain, at least the brain alone. So that that's philosophically, I think that a form of hylomorphism. So you could have the combination of a formal cause as well as a material cause in a non-physicalist understanding of the universe. So I'm not going to be able to answer that if I'm honest. I'm not going to give you a definitive answer of whether the simulated worm would be conscious or a simulated human, even if we managed to do the same thing, would be conscious.
Well, I could give you a tiny piece of more information about that just quite quickly. Is they actually managed to put this artificial worm brain into a robot with sensors that would trip the sensory neurons in the same way it would if the worm hits a wall. And when the robot, this literal Lego robot on wheels, hit a wall, it behaved in the exact same manner with the exact same reverse motion to go away from the wall and carry on moving as a normal worm would, which is really crazy. The robot acted like a worm does.
That is really crazy, and I think that obviously it shows that they've at least managed to simulate like the arguably, that's really strong evidence actually. But the because it includes obviously like the function of its function is acting as a worm, so it's actually including its it seems to have a almost an action, an urging process, or a process that's modified by stimuli, which is. But then
Although
obviously that could be.
yeah,
It depends on
their
whether.
stimuli. There's types of neural networks, and the stimuli neural network is the simplest neural network we know of. It contains 3 neurons, 2 sensory, and then one non-neural neuron, right, with the connector, right. So it's hard to ascertain want and need with a worm like this because it doesn't have any sort of the mechanisms that mammals have for those sorts of things. Like we have entire brain systems about like chemical. Our brains releasing chemicals to make us want to do stuff. It's not the same with this worm. It's very, very robotic in a sense, which is why we probably got it to work. But still, cool,
and it's obviously it's probably breaching that gap of whether it's even whether it has the neurological complexity to even be conscious as well. Like, because obviously, like you could get like it's one of those issues where it's like, how would we attribute consciousness in the first place to the material? And usually, if you look at neuroscience, a lot of the time it's like, you know, they do something and then they observe the behavior of the individual, or they do something and then, you know, ask the individual questions in relation to the brain states of the individual. Rather
if anyone's just jumping in, by the way, I don't want to hog this. But yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say that obviously what I would say is that if we, you know, it's like the Turing machine. If it manages to pass a behavioral test, and we have reason to believe that it could be conscious, I would say that ethically we're obliged to consider it as an individual, that we have no reason to doubt it, and obviously the moral hazard being the rejection of its subjectivity on then they would have to be able to, I would argue, be able to prove that it wasn't conscious just as much as to prove that it was conscious. So I would say that we should probably fall on the side of doubt, you know. But I think that it's difficult to answer any obviously definitively about whether it's conscious or not.
Sure. Just got any other question? I could. There's another example, right, which we haven't digitalized the brain of, but we've observed carefully. There's a trait called encephalization, which is a trait which is to do with how big your brain is compared to your body, and then the relationship that has to how complex the society that animal lives in is, right? So humans have the second highest encephalization rate of any animal, but ants have the highest, right?
Oh, really?
And
okay, that's interesting.
ants are often touted as sort of these robotic creatures that sort of follow these coded paths, and when we observe their behavior, that certainly seems to be the case. But ants, which is interesting enough, actually have quite a strong dopamine center in their brain, and they've actually managed to get ants, they wouldn't say addicted because they didn't manage to show signs of withdrawal because that wasn't in any of the studies, but they managed to have like water laced with sugar, which would sustain them, and water laced with heroin, which would trick the dopamine systems. And they had the ants in 2 separate groups, and the ones that weren't exposed to this water obviously went for the sugar, and the ones that were exposed to the drugs went for the heroin. But because almost every quote-unquote psychological or behavioral study of ants shows them to be almost robotic in nature, and yet we have this study come up and said, well, they can even be their quote-unquote conscious being can be completely sort of overwritten by this sort of dopamine structure in their brain, which you don't often see in insects as sort of simple as ants, especially the more primitive ones. It makes it seem that our concepts of consciousness seem to be a bit out of whack when you look at these sorts of these pieces of information. I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, it is interesting. I would say that it doesn't necessarily prove anything though. Mainly because, like, obviously whether they're having what we can say is that the dopamine response is happening. It's whether the issue is whether they're reacting or not. I would say that the the complexity of an our understanding of material as it is probably implies that they are conscious. Just because of the complexity in relation to the behaviors and so on. And I think that there is almost a foundational behavioral underpinning of what we would say is conscious. And I think that is genuinely seen between the difference between, we would say, a plant's reactionary states and an animal's deliberative states. I don't
know. Maybe you're right in the general sense, but when you were specifically talking about ants, I'm not sure that's correct, because we actually have identified because they use pheromones to communicate, and a small microcarbon on their exoskeleton to identify each other, which is almost like a scent. But the pheromones we've actually identified, and there's like 6 main ones, and there's loads of minor ones, right? But if you basically make this pheromone appear, they will act a certain way, which doesn't seem to be more choice and more sort of like this what would it be like? Just sort of almost like hard coded in their brain, even though there's no evidence. Let's say we give them the alarm pheromone, inject it into the nest, they go crazy, right? There's no threat there, but they go crazy. It doesn't seem to be a conscious sort of thing. It seems to be unconsciously driving them.
Well, I think
completely.
well, I don't necessarily think so. Like, obviously, if you've changed the stimuli from which they would react to, they would react the same anyway, whether they were conscious or not. It's the same with the heroin example. It's like you get humans who are addicted to heroin, which will take the heroin over sustenance, even if it is the more rational decision to do that. And obviously, that capacity for reason isn't necessarily linked to that capacity to be conscious of the value relationship with the world. And so, obviously, their ability to even perceive a lack of danger is separate from the autonomic responses, which would be an action-urging process in relation to the neurochemical responses, arguably, in which they would experience this chemical that would trigger like a physiological reaction of panic or and so on, and then they would consciously experience that panic and then act accordingly. Whether that's necessarily shown that they are they are behaving in terms of pure reaction, or whether they are behaving in terms of that they are just you're changing their value relationships is separate.
That's what I was going to mention. It's I don't think they're actually like it's like, are they making conscious decisions, or is it they're completely beholden to these biological instantiations that are so ingrained that you can completely control essentially their entire little society with a small chemical, regardless of any other stimuli? Like it seems a bit too. It seems a bit too controlling. It seems like you can sit there with a remote control and do what you want with them. It doesn't seem to be like more of a self-conscious kind of being.
Well,
like
this is I mean, like most I guess I would probably retort with the idea that most human intentional states arguably begin from an unconscious, an unconscious level, and obviously that the conscious mind may act as a veto, but only in relation to the capacity to reason. And that capacity is more to do with intelligence and understanding reality than necessarily and the capacity for language as well, than necessarily than simply just being conscious of the value.
Well, it's actually interesting you say that. As you say that, it actually reminds me of a piece of evidence that will actually go against my claim for yours. So there's other studies conducted that show that when ants, if you have two groups of ants, right, and you make one from the same colony, you make one group of ants go out and forage, and they always find food, and they find food all the time, right? And then you have another group of ants that go out and forage, and you make sure there's no food when they find it. You put them together, the ants have found no food will communicate. They'll go and feel and touch the other ants. Would be the ones who looked after the brood. And it seems when they actually said this in like the notes. They basically said this isn't proven, but it seems as if there was some kind of communication as to who should go where.
Oh, that's interesting. Interesting.
Which seems like reasoning on a small scale. They're also one of the only animals, other than some mammals and humans, that show teaching. They'll actually bring when they go foraging, they'll bring a young ant with them, and they'll keep them behind them. And when they get close, they'll speed up. When they get far away, they'll slow down. They'll make sure they're there. They'll leave. They've actually seen it. They dab their abdomen on the ground as they go to leave pheromones for this one specific ant they bring with them, and it's actual teaching. So then when they get to the food, they can actually, when they go foraging, bring young ants with them, and they'll keep them behind them. And when they get close, they get far away.
It's all right. Interesting though. I do think that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's hard to, I don't know. I don't want to think about it. I don't study ethics. It's just interesting.
I think that ultimately it falls on the side of moral hazard. Like, obviously, who do we consider conscious and not, and why? Like, obviously, what do we consider a who, and what do we consider an object? Like a what. And
I think that's often in relation to not shared characteristics, but how we interact with that entity, right? This is how I think like identity works. So if you have like a table, I can go to IKEA and I can find like 10 different tables that share almost no characteristics. But if I show them to loads of humans, they'd all say, yeah, that's a table, that's a table, that's a table, even though there's no characteristic similarity between them. But the only similarity between them is how we interact with it. It's not actually the shared characteristics, which I think where people go wrong with ethics, from minority knowledge, is people try and like list off similar characteristics between two entities, and then they'll basically say, hey man, this shares enough characteristics to be part of this group. And I'm like, I don't think this is how it works at all, because with identity, as it's like self-evident, I think it has nothing to do with shared like physical characteristics as we see them. I know this because this is a problem that AI ran into. If you Google it, it's called the frame problem. An AI can't see. This is why we can't get robots to open doors. A robot sees a door handle and interprets it like a billion different ways, because technically speaking, that is how it can be interpreted. But humans know how to action with it, even though we see a million different kinds of door handles.
Because of language.
If I invented a new door handle that no one's ever seen before, 99% of humans who interact with door handles know what to do with it, which is interesting.
Because they understand the concept of doors in the first place, and so there's an attributable function in relation to the door.
Yeah, yes, but it's not like physiological attributations. It's always to do with function and how you interact with it. It's not to do with like listing off these different attributes they have.
And funnily enough, there's arguments, and it's Marty from the philosophy chat who was telling us about this. Actually, there's arguments now popping up in biology which are arguing for the inclusion of formal and formal causes. Like final causes, for example, in Aristotelian terms. So when I talked about hylomorphism before, in relation to the relationship between the material and the formal cause, like obviously Aristotle takes four causes: the material, the efficient, the final, and the formal, right?
Yeah.
And the final cause is which I think he's right in this, is the purpose, the function in relation to the function. So I would say that understand, like let's say something like a seed. As a seed, you need to understand the function of a seed and what it does, and it's the necessary I don't want to say the word the necessary, I don't want to use the word function to describe function, but the necessary functions entailed in relation to obviously for what it means to be a seed. And these are, like, I would say, at least supervened, included within the concept of being a seed, or being a human, or being an ant. And I would say that these are the what are considered when we talk about the functions of conscious beings, the functions of subjective beings. And I think that what we have to kind of go off is really in terms of foundations of ethics, is a form of behaviorism, which we attribute the actions of individuals in relation to resistance and approval, approval and approval and dismissal in relation to the physical world, and whether that changes behavior. And if we observe that, then I would say that they must be considered as having a subjective experience, whether or not they do or not, because our understanding of subjective experience in the first place is built off this level of behaviorism as necessary pre-linguistic communication to even get into language in the first place. So we can attribute, intentional states in relation to others. When they say something like slab, this is the Wittgensteinian example, they point to an object and say slab. We need to understand what they are trying to express with that action, and understand obviously that action as a whole. We need to already attribute to them like a form of functionality in relation to pointing to that slab. So they're trying to communicate something to us, and what are they doing in relation to that communication? And this kind of pre-linguistic communication in the first place, this foundational level of behaviorism, I think can be seen in all animals. And so I would say that's why we can't dismiss, and that's why I said, like, look, we'll have the moral hazard. Sorry?
In all animals?
Well, not necessarily all animals. I think that you could make the case against
that worm.
I don't know enough about that worm to talk about it, so I'm not gonna. But it seems
I can say with pretty confidence you can count up to the number of neural connections it has at the age of 7. You can count how many neurons it has at like the age of 4 if you're like good at maths. Right? It's not a very complicated kind of creature. It's not a. It's so simple. We've actually managed to digitalize it accurately. So
yeah, that is very simple. I guess the issue is like, how simple does it, like, how complex does a being have to be to attribute a conscious evaluation of the world? And I think that the issue is that we can't necessarily answer that question without reference to the behaviors in the first place. And so if it's behaving as if it is conscious, or or evaluating the world. Then we have to consider it. It's not something that we can do without dismissing the very foundations of our own linguistic system, from which we would even be able to give rise to concepts in the first place, and ethical concepts included. And so,
but the problem I have with this is, and I hate to get into like sort of the weird pragmatic approach to it, though, is that this sort of if it's established that it does express its sort of how it does in a biological sense of terms, and we put it in the robot, and it acts how a normal worm does. And some people will say, hey man, that shows its level of consciousness as it does in the real world accurately. Like the scientists and programmers have done this well, right? This means that deletion of the file is equating to killing, right? And here's another thing: and there's some creatures with a very basic form of pain receptors, right? Where they only have like a few of them. Okay, if we're able to tie them into a neural network, or even crazier, like make our own neural network that's not even a creature that exists, and tie in these pain neurons, and then trigger them to the highest extent they could be triggered consistently.
It would be considered torture.
And here's the thing, though. When it comes to clock speed in programs, we can speed it up. So we can change the time preference for this creature. We can make it think like a year has passed in like a week, depending on how simple the neural network is. So I can torture it for a year in a second. And if someone genuinely believes that the program is like on a sort of morally culpable level as the physical being, which technically speaking, I think it should be, right? If you're trying to be consistent with this, because it shares, I think, the exact same attributes, and I know to some degree how they do it, and it seems accurate because they literally look at every single cell individually, right? They can't get it wrong, right? So, and multiple groups have been doing this and come up with the same thing. There's a crazy one, right? There's a group of scientists that didn't codify a brain. They got a piece of rat brain. They stuck it in a jar. They put sensors in it and essentially attached it up to Bluetooth, and then put that Bluetooth to a car that has sensors on it, and the car would move around. And when it came up to a wall, it would back up and move around. It was a little car that would go around. It was controlled by a rat brain in the same building. And after about 3 months, the cells would degrade because it doesn't get the right nutrition and it's only part of the brain. But the interesting thing is, whenever they did it with a different rat brain, the robot would act differently. So this is almost sort of proof of concept, right?
Yeah. I mean, what I would say there is like we should be very much obligated to not torture simulated consciousness.
But then,
and I'm happy to bite that bullet. To me, like even if it is like not conscious at all, like even unless we can prove that it's not conscious, I think the burden of proof lies on our side.
It's hard to do that.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
think you can, because I think every test we take shows that it is conscious. Like we literally just give it like basic motor functions, and it acts how it does in the real world with its own basic motor functions.
Yeah, exactly. So then moral hazard lies on the side, like the evidence lies on the side of it being conscious. So then we should attribute ethics to it, unless we can show that it's ethically not considerable. And I don't think that's going to be a way to do that. So yeah.
Again, I was going to tie it. I started all that random tirade. I'm very interested. Started out that tirade with I was going to take a pragmatic approach. My approach to this is that if you're going to try and be a morally consistent society, you should stop that shit right now. You know,
I would certainly agree.
Because I've talked to a professor and I've researched this enough and I've learned about it. To a limited degree, I know that the immense help that artificial intelligence could bring us, right? But I also know the limitations of where we are with it at the moment. And the biggest limitation is getting neural networks to communicate with each other. We don't know how they communicate with each other differently, right? That's the problem we have. And the bridging the gap of this, it might be, well, hey man, why don't we just copy nature like we do for like a lot of other stuff, for loads of things to solve the problem. So let's just take a biological brain and put it digitally, and then we can train it to do something useful. Which is, it's great. Because at the moment, a lot of people think, oh, we got neural networks right now, and it's like the silver bullet. They're wrong. It's so stupid. You need to get it to do this like chess. Here's a great example. The best chess engine in the world had to play chess like 10 million times before it got really good. That's not an efficient brain.
No.
This is one really specific task, and it managed to brute force its way through it, essentially. It's not intelligent, right? It's not intelligent at all. So I think it would get massively in the way of such huge progress, which I think is the next step, right? AI, I think, is the big next step. I think it's too pragmatic to put under the carpet because of ethics.
Well, I don't look at it like this. What's the value of AI if we don't have ethics?
You could tout it to sort of like temporary ethical exhaustion for almost unlimited potential and expansion, right?
So you'd have to make the argument that the ends justify the means.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically. And I think that can be made. I think that can be made
You
anyway.
see, I think that if you use another being as anything other than an end in itself, then you are unjustified. So
What do you mean by that? Yeah, exactly.
So, like, for example, if you aren't considering the experiences of the AI as valuable, like, let's say you were to, and honestly, I think that ones with animal experiments especially need to be, like, if we wouldn't
Like-
do it, like, we shouldn't do that. That's, I think that
I got
actively
the code,
dismisses.
I've got the code of the worm on my computer right now. I haven't. The program's not outdated for me.
Please tell
I
us
have
you're
the
not
code.
torturing it.
It doesn't have this worm doesn't have pain receptors. It can't experience pain.
Okay, that's great.
It's such a simple creature, right? I can't express that enough.
Okay, I guess
It's
the
really
only issue.
simple.
I guess the only issue is like, could it experience a desire without pain receptors? Could you be frustrating it because it would feel numb, which is something that we
can. So I'll give it. It has basically 4 types of neurons, right? Really basic. It has sensory neurons,
Mhm.
interneurons, motor neurons, and non-neural cells, right? Non-neural cells essentially. Non-neural cells and interneurons are self-explanatory. They're the gaps between the motor neurons and sensory neurons. But the non-neural cells is like the actual, what you would call the actual brain, the center brain of it, right? And they essentially connect to everything. And there's I don't think it's demonstrated, but when it hits a wall, it will turn. And I could essentially put it in a box for it's too small for it to turn around, and it'll constantly be prodding its own neural network with this weird sensory overload because it's going to be constantly getting this input. So I'm not
Mhm.
sure if you would interpret that as frustration, right? I'm not sure
Yeah.
how you'd be able to do that.
But I guess that's the issue.
Um,
We don't know enough necessarily about it to even say like whether it's
Well,
a positive or negative
we-
state. Obviously, does it feel
It-
positive when it bounces off the wall? And
We
does
know
it, but does
it's a want though, right?
Well,
We can know that going out into a wall is bad for the creature, and the creature, let's say, quote unquote, knows this because whenever it hits a wall, it always goes away because it's looking for food, basically, right? This is
Okay.
the whole idea.
Okay.
So it knows that walls are bad. So
So
if
I
I just
think-
surround it with walls, then you could probably, you might
a
be able
form
to say
of frustration. Yeah. So
maybe, I don't know.
like I think that would be an argument that I think would probably hold up. I think that there is at least adequate evidence to believe that it is either feeling frustration when it hits the wall, or pleasure when it moves away from the wall. So I think this is like obviously it depends on whether we would attribute like an approval or an approval or disdain in relation to the behavior, which is I think obviously the simplicity of the organism is almost impossible.
It's very
So
simple.
I think that we should
It's
just
very
again
simple.
just fall on the side of safety and just say like, look, in pretty much every creature that we're aware of, negative value supersedes positive value in relation to avoiding pain takes greater precedence than seeking pleasure, and so
You think that's binary? Really?
Uh,
that seems a bit weird to me.
I don't think
like
it's
try and
binary.
establish
I don't think
you don't try and like establish a hierarchy of, let's say, like a small amount of negative emotion for a huge amount of positive
Oh
emotion.
yeah. absolutely. I'm just saying that
Okay.
like don't get me wrong. Like I think that is the basis of ethics. I think that's like
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I was
um,
gonna say, like, I could create some weird societies if you were gonna make those binary.
Oh no! I would say that it's 100% the basis of ethics, and I think that Plato actually shows that in Gorgias in relation to pain and pleasure. He says it couldn't possibly be the end of ethics, having the greatest amount of pleasure or the least amount of pain, because we need to understand the pain and pleasure in relation to each other. And basically, in talking about the brave man and the coward on a battlefield, is it better to be the brave man or the coward? And then directly actually talks about the brave man feeling less pleasure at vanquishing the enemy, but less fear at their approach, and obviously the coward having greater fear but also greater pleasure at vanquishing them. It's like, what is the better value relationship in relation to one's life? That is the goal of ethics. That's why I would say better to be the brave man, because we know that the fear is not worth it.
So can you repeat that last bit? So I was trying to follow that.
Oh yeah, so is it better to be
I'm not too fast.
Oh yeah, sorry. So is it better to be brave on the battlefield, or is it better to be cowardice? Because the brave man, we would argue, feels less pleasure at vanquishing the enemy, or like less relief, we'll at least say,
Sure.
but then also feels less, fear on the reproach, whilst the coward will feel a greater amount of fear, but also a greater amount of relief or pleasure when they are vanquished, when they win. So is it better to be the coward or the brave man? And obviously,
or when they lose, actually. Also, with a coward, vanquishing. It could be themselves. They'd be relieved if they're about to die because they wouldn't have to kill someone. That's been like documented in the time before.
That's
People wanting to die so they don't have to go kill people.
well, I think
It's an extreme form of cowardice, though.
Or obviously it could be argued that it's obviously I would say that even it could be obviously ethical concepts and their evaluation of subjectivity itself, like that they would find an action like that so repugnant that it could like ideologically be incompatible with their identity. So, for example, a Christian would normally rather be killed than kill. Normally maybe as a bit of a
by
jump.
their definition of kill, sure. Yeah, by their interpretation of kill.
Yeah, whether like so, for example, and then obviously there's it depends upon the reasoning and understanding of the individual. But it is like obviously a value response in relation to the individual on the battlefield, and I think that Plato could probably argue, and not just Plato, but I think ethics, we could argue that it's better to be a soldier who is brave on the battlefield primarily because they are more likely to actually achieve the end goal even. And these are the arguments that as well could be made. Like obviously, if you're gripped by fear, it might impede your rationality, and so on. So yeah, like I think that obviously I would say that is like obviously the relationship between pleasure and pain and positive and negative is the foundation for ethics. What is the good life? Is that understanding of that dynamic. But I think on part of the animal, I think of this worm, I think it would be fair to say that we should, try to mitigate its frustration, not necessarily actively,
Here's an interesting thing though, right? So at the moment, I have the code for its neurons on my computer, but the program isn't running. I've essentially put its consciousness on hold, and I have the control to do that. I'd imagine you would probably say this is an unethical way to do it, even though it's not feeling anything. Right? For all intents and purposes, it's like dead, right? But it's not dead because it will have the code like it updates, right?
I was gonna say like, would it be dead? I'm not gonna lie. I think these. I don't know.
I actually think this program doesn't actually hold. This program doesn't hold memory, so it would die every time I close it. But if it did hold memory, then you could say it wouldn't die. It doesn't hold memory.
But even then, like it's like it depends on what we consider death, and like obviously, would it die or would it just
if I delete it, would this be unethical?
Well, I think that like obviously, I think that rather than deleting, I think deleting it, would it be like obviously if it's not running anyway, then it's not.
As a computer scientist, I know that deleting it doesn't actually delete it. It takes away the file directory. But if I securely deleted it, which I know how to do, would that be unethical?
Well, I don't think that the issues with obviously it's whether it's running or not, and I think that like I think I would consider starting it in order to stop it prematurely in relation to what it is. So
it's like normal life cycle.
Yeah,
let's say.
would be unethical. So like then like obviously if you changed it like you could in theory
I could change
simulate
it.
So that you live for 300 years and then it's I'm not gonna lie. I think there is the main issue I'd be more worried about is playing God.
I'm essentially playing God right now, though.
It's I would say that the caprice of humanity and the our limited capacities are not ready for such power. Is probably what I would say. Like
I would say probably never ready for such power.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
That's interesting. But yeah. Anyone else should jump in? Right? I feel like I'm just like babbling.
Oh no, really interesting. I really appreciate the conversation. I might actually end up just clipping this part of the conversation and put it up as a separate video because I actually found that very interesting.
Nice.
Please,
nice.
Please try and tell everyone in your department not to cut up rats.
This isn't my. This is the University of York. I'm in Wales, right? This is not my university. It's just my university professor knows about it.
Okay, so. I'll remember that about the University of York, and I'm definitely going to.
I think it was the University of York.
Okay, I'll have a look. I'll have a look because I'm definitely going to protest that shit.
You actually really? It's part of a rat's brain. That's interesting. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, but thank you very much for the conversation, man.
Yeah, no worries.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions for perspective?
Yeah, I do. If I don't know about anybody else, sorry, just jumped right in there. Been waiting. What the hell did I ask or wanted to ask? Okay, yeah. So what's some like reading material on like ethics I've like gone through a bit of the Fundamentals of Ethics by Russ Schaefer Landau, but I don't know if I would have been able to like keep up with what you were saying in that debate. I didn't. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really get what you were. I was even confused by like some of the approaches you took, but even the stuff you were saying was definitely like over my head.
Yeah, I mean that's fair enough. Like if you want to understand like my position on ethics, I would say like a best introduction to it was because it's a Hegelian position. Would be Hegel, a reader's guide to Hegel's phenomenology. Hegel's philosophy of right, by David Rose. I actually got that on my Amazon store. If you're interested, that's in the description of my videos, and it's written by David
definitely.
Rose. He was one of me lecturers at Newcastle University. Essentially, it begins the dialectic from understanding, from taking the position of what is necessarily the case in relation to our metaphysical understanding of reality, and then building it up from there. So, in Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, and in Hegel's Science of Logic, particularly the phenomenology of spirit would be relevant here, because he takes us to begin from being and non-being as being two infinite aspects of our reality. So that which is and that which isn't, which is its direct negation, being the fundamental the fundamental aspects of our understanding of reality. They're both infinite. And being infinite, he would say that we could not understand either of them. That they go beyond that there is no differentiation there, which allows us to understand objects or understand anything in relation to any way to gain knowledge. And then we start building that up in relation to, we may like, and it's arguable that there's concepts applied by nature, but I don't think that this necessarily matters. But I would say that fundamentally we enter a language game with other individuals in order to understand reality. And part of understanding reality, and arguably the reason that we try to understand reality, is to gain an understanding of ourselves and the expressions of our desires which are moving us through the world, the expressions of our value responses, to try and seek positive and avoid negative, and then say that these are the basis of our subjectivity as in the first place. These are undeniable in relation to the end of even Cartesian reasoning, right? And I'd say that given that our understanding of ourselves and our understanding of objects and how we should behave interact with them are based upon our relationships with other individuals. And so we want, even in the most fundamental level, a relationship with another individual which allows for the greatest perpetuation of knowledge. And that would, I would argue, require a level of equality and consideration of that individual's ability to verify and falsify our reasoning. So we must consider other beings as capable of approving or dismissing of our position, and especially in ethics, we must show that they are capable of evaluating aspects of reality and approving or dismissing our evaluations, even in relation to ourselves. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to say that, to a smoker, for example, that believed that smoking was good for them, that it's not good for them in relation to their own interest in their own nature, or like a heroin addict, or someone who any addict, anything like that. And so when we are talking about individuals who believe they want something, but then arguably do not realize that they would not want it if they knew otherwise, that requires the ability of that individual's premises to be rejected by other individuals. And I'd say that this is a form of, one, it requires epistemic objectivity, but also metaphysical objectivity only exists in relation between other agents. And I'd say ethics implies that it exists between other evaluators. And I would say that evaluation, as far as we understand it, only is within subjective agents, subjective beings. So yeah, I hope that explains the position.
Okay.
I don't know if I don't think I'm layman friendly as a human.
No, I think I kind of got it. I've heard like Hegel's really confusing. So when you said that, I was like, oh god, I don't know. This is gonna go badly. No, no, no. It
David
was
Rosal
fine. I
put
think
it
you did fine.
really nice.
But
He puts it
I
really
think
great.
I, th-
Yeah.
I
Sorry.
think the most confusing part was you had said like infinite like interpretations or something,
Oh,
but then
when I talked
it
about
sounded like
infinites, I just meant I'll not get into the Hegel babble actually. Basically, Hegel's just like the analogy he gives in the phenomenology is like walking into a pitch black room or walking into a room of blinding light. Both rooms you cannot see because you are either given too much information or too little. You aren't able to differentiate between objects in those scenarios. And so he argues that the only way that you can understand objects is a combination of, like darkness and light, light and shadows, which allows for a gradient of different beings, determinate being, as he calls it. And each determinate being has its own characteristics of not being something else. So, a chair is not a table, and so contains in it the not being a table for you to be able to differentiate them in the first place. Now, I would agree with that, and I would say that how we understand reality in relation to, or even verifying or falsifying our understandings of this positive and negative combination of concepts, but also whether we are missing some negatives and missing some positives, is in relation to our limited view of the world. Right? We have a very narrow scope from which we see. It's a very first person bias understanding of reality, and so the only way that we can remove that bias and remove that ironically the subjectivity which gets in the way of expressing our subjectivity is through the subjectivity of another individual who can enlighten us to things that we are missing. And so there is almost the foundation of ethics in this respect, I would say, exists in the willingness to aid, to agree upon a system in which we mutually aid each other in our expression of subjectivity.
okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So there's a lot of in not totally accurate layman's terms. There's a lot of subjectivity. Everybody's kind of got a subjective take, and you're just trying to find common ground.
Yeah, and I would say that what is common is all that we could talk about in terms of knowledge. Because if we talk about something that's purely subjective, I would say that it would be private, and it being private prevents it from being falsified in the most basic sense. But in a more complex sense, if you want to understand why private language doesn't work, check out Wittgenstein's argument against private language. And that's, I would say, the foundation of why metaphysically we could not understand ourselves even without a common domain.
Okay, so would you have for that prop, would you then have the initial one, not when he changed it? Uh, gosh, my first thought was oh my gosh, if I didn't have viewers, or if I wasn't this dude and I had viewers or whatever on YouTube or whatever you were doing, I might just leave this friggin' thing if the first thing this dude told me was especially when it was so different from the initial prop.
Well, it's just
But
what the Ask Yourself kind of crew server do, isn't it? They use the word agnostic as to try and get out of really any making any kind of claim, and it's honestly it's kind of a sophistic position, isn't it?
And then he was staying agnostic on any fucking thing that you were saying.
Yeah, but the issue is that you can't do that because of the law of the excluded middle.
Oh my god, it was brutal. Anyways,
Yeah.
So with this prop, veganism and the actions entailing veganism are not and never have been moral obligations, would you then have just come in and been two people out there have come to common ground? Maybe, I don't know if you are a vegan, you could say
I am.
I'm a vegan and my cousin is a vegan, and we both agree that we're vegans, therefore, like, this prop is false.
I would say that our understanding of I would probably have like argued from like dialectically from the ground up, because I'm a continental, and I take a Hegelian style, so I'm probably more I like to be more what's the word, like thorough, but you could say long-winded. Essentially, I would say that I would begin from like what he understands ethics to be, and see if we understand ethics in the same respect, even to have the conversation, which I tried to do.
Yeah.
And then if not, then I would argue what ethics must be, and then from ethics I would say that the consideration of sentient beings is foundational for ethics itself, and to function, and that the consideration of a given, like tribalistic common ground, so like or a non-universal common ground, so like like I don't know, like humanity, English people, race, sex, religion, whatever it is, as being a morally relevant feature is
like beneficial. Like, it's beneficial to have
well,
like moral stances.
what I
in a
would say
society.
is that it's ultimately ad hoc. In other words, it cannot be shown that it, like, as in, it would kind of fail to Hume's guillotine. It would you could basically say that there is no implied ought in relation to any of those concepts, but there is an implied ought in relation to desire and subjectivity, and the functional concept that resides within it, for ethics to function in the first place. So a consideration of any other individualistic notion of good is asserted, is assumed, and therefore is can be dismissed as being via a natural by a Humean position, whilst a position of, let's say, like McIntyre or something like that, in terms of functional concepts, the ought is entailed in subjectivity, and so the only thing that can be considered is what implies an action urging process in relation to something that is in relation to something that which could be said as being unjustified or justified by a given agent. So like whether you and your actions would be justified in relation to achieving a given goal would be in relation to the universal understanding of telos, of desire, which is foundational within ethics. And I would say that only can exist in an understanding of valuation, like axiologically, which exists in subjectivity. Yeah, so that's what I would have done. But obviously, that's why I'm writing me PhD on that. And like obviously, I probably want to work out how to say this to normal humans better.
Interesting. Okay.
I would probably second that.
Yeah.
I think it was pretty good. The only part I lost you on that was when you said subjectivity at the end. I would have thought that you were going to say something like, we agree on this, and now we can come to like a conclusion on, like, here's all this good. This is why it's all a good reason to, like, for a country, for example, or just any society, to agree on a set of ethics, a set of morals, or whatever you want to call it. And then now that we have this objective sense of morality within the society, we can go from there.
But it's only objective in a phenomenal, in like a phenomenal sense, like, or a nominal sense. It's only objective to the language game then, which means it's only intersubjective. What I would say is that for it to be truly objective, it has to exist in reality itself and be metaphysically instantiated in relation to reality itself. Otherwise, it's just a systemic view, which could be literally any concept at all. and is again open to Hume's guillotine. It's like, well, why would I enter this community? It's like, it very well may be that. And this is actually, funnily enough, the argument that you're using there is actually one that is used to try and overcome Hume's guillotine, but I think sidesteps it. And it's actually an argument, and I was actually going to bring this up in the discussion because it was kind of relevant, but it's an argument used by Philippa Foot, and it's what's called, what are they called? I keep forgetting the name. There's a, what's it? They're not complex moral concepts. There's a word I'm looking for. If anyone wants to remind us of thick moral concepts, that's it. Right. Thick moral concepts are value entailed concepts, right? So like for me to say that your behavior was rude, I can point that your behavior genuinely was rude, and that entails a negative evaluation if you've committed behaviors which would be culturally defined as rude. So like, it is the case that, someone, let's say, picking their nose at a dinner table in Britain is rude, and that is defined, that can be defined. However, it doesn't tell me why I should care. And the concept of in the evaluation of the concept itself, why should I even accept that concept? And so there's like a metaphysical it's a metaphysical loophole in which the individual's like nominally it's assumed value in relation to a thick concept, but hasn't instantiated why any given thick concept should be considered as right or justified in the first place. And I would say that in terms of, let's say, we have agreed, for a tribalistic morality, I would say that it was a false universal, that the reasoning was false, and that the only reason that we consider individuals, it's not that just that me and you are considered, because if it's just me and you, then it's still subjective, or at best intersubjective. It's still bias. If we're trying to eliminate bias, which is the only reason that we are really communicating, to try and give an actual understanding of reality as it is, so that we can achieve our desires, then we must eliminate all subjective bias, and it must be objective, as in mind, independent of any given mind. And
is there, when one defines objective by using the term reality,
mm-hmm.
in the definition, does that end up being circular reasoning? Is there a distinction between a final, conclusion of what we mean by objective and a final conclusion of what we mean by real versus non-real?
Yeah, I mean, like what I was trying to do there, like as what I said there was, by objective, I mean independent of any given mind. So as in,
I'm more going off what you were saying from before.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I noticed that you redid it with mind. But if we define mind as, how do you mean mind is the alternative of what you mean when you say real?
I'm not actually. I'm an objective idealist, so I certainly wouldn't do that. That's why I said any given mind. So any particular or any individual instantiation of or understanding of reality. So in other words, I would say that it necessarily, rationally, must be the case, if any given individual was to understand the argument, they must then conclude that this argument is true, and that be applicable to the the flow of logic, so long as it is logical and rationally instantiated. And that's what I would say, as objective, as in it either is necessarily the case, as in a priori, or that it is sufficiently the case. Either so a priori synthetic or synthetic or something.
So, objective idealist. Is that what you?
Yeah, so that's absolute idealist.
Like Berkeley's three dialogues?
No, that's Hegel again.
Okay.
I'm literally just a Hegel fanboy. I have a Hegel T-shirt. I should probably get Hegel tattooed on my face. It's to give you a brief understanding of objective idealism. Objective idealism is essentially the understanding that reality is mind thinking of itself, but that mind itself exists in between individual agents who are able to metaphysically divest the world from in relation to each other. So it's think of it like this.
Yeah, I mean, if memory is stored in different locations, right?
Yeah, it would be like what reality is the perceptual experience of conscious beings entirely. Like all conscious beings in their experience is essentially is objective of any given agent. So like your experience is objective of my experience, and so you're an object of my experience. But your mind exists free of mine, and because of that, there is an objectivity that can be instantiated between us, in relation to a common domain, but only in relation to the common domain. Otherwise, it could be subjective, or would be subjective. It would be in relation to only your domain and not my domain. And so it implies the idea that essentially the only evidence that we have of any given reality is of an intersubjective common basis, in relation to metaphysically instantiated arguments. So like understanding of like certain concepts in relation to each other, and then applied to what exists common in our experiences.
That's great. That's great. I've done drive-bys of Hegel, right? But I was actually asking Arco, I don't think he's on here right now, the other day, if there were any on Audible that would be worth actually listening to from Hegel himself, because that's the joke, right? Feminist versus Hegel.
Well, I think
you put it that way, it's a genius way to get around some issues with Kant, or at least with some problems that Kant encountered, but maybe didn't solve.
But I think that's really the goal of Hegel. He says he's to elevate the loftiness of Kant. Was it to take the loftiness of Kant to an earthly here and now? And I think that's what he does. I think that's really what he does. And arguably, people say that Hegel's basically what Kant would have written if he hadn't died. So.
Oh fuck. Okay. That's pretty cool. Got a Plato pointing up, Aristotle pointing out, except it's Kant and Hegel.
Yeah, I mean, very Aristotelian. I think that he basically takes Kant, and I think that he almost brings it back to the ancient Greeks. And I think he's just like Hegel was very big on metaphysics, and he says like essentially he basically starts it with the problem with philosophy today is that nobody understands metaphysics and that nobody's being taught metaphysics. And I think that is the continued issue of philosophy in general. People just start philosophy wherever the hell they want, and they don't have worldviews that make any sense. So, like, there are people who make just ad hoc assumptions and enter philosophy in relation to like how they believe, certain understandings of reality would work, without actually having engaged in what reality is. And I think this is why metaphysics is so important, because I think that we can engage in philosophy without doing metaphysics, but whether or not we will make good arguments without metaphysics is another point.
I mean, yeah, he's around for the toddler analog of what ends up being the modern scientific method, right? So he's in a spot where that's the big deal. What can we know about reality and what can't we?
Yeah,
and how?
Hegel's really considered one of the foundational philosophers in relation to the development of science. His whole philosophy is about grounding science, and he criticizes science for that as well. He's like scientists aren't considering why we should even believe in science. He's like, I'll tell you why we should believe in science, and here it is, So, and that I think it is really important, and I try and say this to people like, I really value science, but I wish that there was just a little bit more, a little bit more philosopher friendly, in the sense that I wish they would go and read some philosophers. It's like, because I think that if we try to engage in philosophy, we are usually expected to engage with science as it is, and the conclusions that are being drawn by scientists. And I think we'd be fools not to, especially in terms of like AI, in terms of human biology and a plethora of many different issues. We usually have to consider what's going on in science, but it's very rare that you find like a scientist that's willing to engage in any form of philosophy, especially neuroscience for some reason.
I don't think it's about willingness to do. I just don't think the evolutionary biologists and computer scientists have even begun to talk yet. I don't think it's like an unwillingness to. I just don't think.
I'm gonna jump in here because I feel you and I'm with you, but I think it even comes from an even deeper level than that, and that's the theoretical physicists, right? And I don't think it's elitist to say the fundamental aspect of science is theoretical physics.
Here.
Yeah. So I studied physics as an undergrad, and I'm currently hiding out COVID before I go to grad school. But that's fucking preach. Like, that's one of my biggest things. I did my senior seminar basically on what you just said. And like the poetic way that I like to say to people is, Oppenheimer, he sees the explosion of the nuclear bomb and he doesn't start thinking about Einstein's equations. He thinks of a line from the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm like, guys, we used to be like the top intellectuals, like the top, like learned people from all the different sorts. We got, Einstein quoting Spinoza and all that jazz, right? And theory has not progressed at all since the standard model.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that
experimentalists have been killing it in physics, but the theorists haven't done shit. Like string theory, there's so many like other theories that need to be shown to be accurate to even get to string theory being close to accurate, and none of them have had any evidence turn up. And yeah, preach. We need them to be natural philosophers. We need physicists to be natural philosophers.
I would agree, and I think that theoretical physics is probably the most philosophically friendly of the forms of science that I've seen, and I think that probably comes with you having to really evaluate the standard model of physics in the first place.
You're looking at the unknown head on. You're on the cliff looking out at the nothing. There's no like anybody in front of you like, okay, well, they're dealing with that more specific shit. Nope. You're standing on the plank.
Right, it's not completely unknown. We have like different interpretations of these theoretical realms, right? And some of them have like because we know that they interact with the specific and the measured. We don't know how they interact necessarily, but we know they do. So it can't be completely, out there, blank space.
Well,
I mean, unknown is in like physics, like in terms, like not like the
limits of the field. It's the
yeah.
And I think that it's
the limits of our current theories. Like we know what we don't know.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
and I think that's actually a good way to put it. Like we know what we don't know, and it's almost. And I think that's what like people like Lacan in psychoanalytics and Zizek talks about in terms of ideology. In terms of understanding and evaluating ideology, we grasp the real in understanding what is not the symbolized. So if we understand that there is limits in relation to the symbol in terms of the symbolized, as in we know that this is not real, we know that there is a gap in our understanding of reality, and this is where we need to fill the gap. And I think that in terms of ideology and in terms of theory and so on, and I think that in what you said there is that we can't be looking into the absolute void. I would completely agree. I think if we were, then we would have removed, if we were like truly looking into the void, then we remove the normativity of physics as a whole. We're like, all right, well, none of that worked. And then obviously we start removing language and the foundations epistemically, and all of that crumbles underneath it. But then I say that like, obviously that it's, like obviously we don't need that to understand the real. In fact, what we need is that system. We need that normativity, and we need that ability to evaluate the normativity and its inadequacies to really grasp any understanding of reality. And I think that luckily, obviously, I think physics is doing that. Like theoretical physics is doing that. But I think that the beautiful thing is, and I think it's Aristotle who said this, it doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you end. And if the end goal is a 1-to-1 ratio between the symbol and the real, so like obviously an understanding of reality which actually corresponds with reality, then what we need is a normative system which is self-evaluating in order to show why it's not corresponding with reality. And I think that that's why we would want like a natural, as you say, like a natural philosopher. Because we want someone who understands the limitations of their own theorizing in relation to what they are theorizing.
If I've managed to find a web link, if you want a worm's brain on your computer, not on your computer, but in your web browser.
I really do not.
Okay.
That would be, I think, a definite stretch of my vegan ethics. So yeah,
because I got it running right now, and you'll probably hate this, but I can make his brain go completely haywire by just activating and putting like way too much electricity through each of these neurons. But at the moment I got it running normally, right? So at least you're happy to know that. But I could if I wanted to.
Why don't you
go
just
absolutely insane.
run it to give it the best life for a period of however many weeks it would normally live, and then turn it off.
It actually runs slower than real time. Interesting enough, because it's so complicated for a computer to run this many. Like even though it's so simple, like it's still complicated enough, right? So it runs like 1 second every 10 seconds.
Okay,
but,
that
yeah,
doesn't make me feel
I've got the
any
link.
better. How long is the lifespan?
I don't even know what is the lifespan of this. Is C. elegans? I'll look it up now. What is the lifespan of these? It can't be too long. 2 to 3 weeks. Well, this
2
is
to
going to
3
be.
weeks. Well, you're gonna have to keep your computer on for what, like 20 to 30 weeks? This is not ideal.
Well, it gets exponentially slower as well because it records activity. So.
Oh, of course it does. And I'll just say, like, look, like, please, just be nice to it. Like, it's moral hazard, man. One of these days, they're gonna simulate your brain, and then there's gonna be, people are gonna be like, well, is he conscious? I don't know, man. And then you're just gonna be walking around in a simulation, like, what the fuck is going on? Like, like, genuinely, just try to be considerate.
I don't know, man. It's just, I can see its brain. Like here, it's crazy. It's pretty cool. I don't know. I can look at each individual neuron and see the electricity going through it at the correct rates they should be, over the correct times they should be, and interactions.
I'm zoning in and out because I'm at work. Are you talking about the mouse brain?
No. This is the no. They haven't modeled the mouse brain. That's like that'd be way too complicated. They modeled the worm.
We did. We just did it.
I don't say they just modeled a mouse brain. How the hell did they manage that? That's like millions of neurons. Like what?
Yep.
It just gets
My
worse.
buddy's in biometrics. He just hit me up about it.
That's so much more complicated than what we did with the worm.
Yeah, it is.
God.
Yeah, it is.
Why?
Okay, now that's actually getting into the realm of. Okay,
He said down to every neuron.
Wow, they actually did it with a rat. That's crazy. Like I know we did it with a worm, and that's like doable, right? Because you can actually like count the number of neurons.
Why are we doing this?
It's interesting. I don't know. AI development, brain development, consciousness.
Oh god, humans weren't really meant to do.
I mean, there's a lot of neuroscience that we can find, right? And biometrics is computational biology. So think of this, right? So science, you want to control in a variable, right? And so much of that is required on having symmetric start points. And how easy will it be to find two identical cells? Even if it's one cell just splitting, right? Like small mutations. So if you're looking for like direct causation from certain gene signatures, it's extremely useful for us to be able to do that computationally, because now we can actually have.
I can't believe they did it.
Exactly. We have like two similar.
That's crazy.
This is what my buddy's like all about going into. And he's been studying in grad school.
It's so like
I
well
really
done.
Just think, I just really think that there needs to be more ethics involved with everything in science. Just everything. Oh my god!
I know, man. I can go full mad doctor mode. I can even simulate neuron damage and delete neurons from the network, right? As if to simulate aging in the worm.
Oh, great. Okay.
I can actually give it brain damage. Not only that, I can give it brain damage, and I can make unnatural connections happen. So an interneuron will never fire without another neuron firing first next to it. But I can make the interneuron fire immediately. And interestingly enough, when I do that, the entire brain goes haywire.
You basically give it a seizure.
Honestly, you should see the screen. It lights up like a Christmas tree when I put a tiny bit of electricity through an interneuron by itself, because it connects to everything. It goes crazy.
I'm just going to say that I think this is incredibly ethically repugnant.
It's like a worm that doesn't even feel pain. Come on.
We don't even understand what positive and negative relates to, and whether it, like, all of this is just. Oh god, I hate this so much.
But do you want me to? Should I stop? Or should I close the tab? The closing the tab would actually stop the program this time. It's not like deletion of a file, so that would kill it. So am I obligated to keep it running?
Well, this is. I'm not even going to answer. I'm not involving myself in this.
Okay. Sorry.
I want to keep my. How do I wash this worm blood off my hands?
In a more abstract way. Now, ideally, we have philosophers who know math. We have philosophers who know computer science for what I'm about to bring up. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned the bio and the AI, right? Mm-hmm. And we almost get into the is-ought problem, if not explicitly in the is-ought problem with that. And I've been saying for a while that it's the philosophers have to step up for that. And we can say, okay, well, if we code it, here's what we predict it will do. But basically, we need like almost like a constitutional convention sort of thing for AI. Like, okay, we're going to set this program running, and we're not going to be able to control it once it's gone, and we need to find all the ifs, ands, or buts. And that's the job of a philosopher. It's not the job of, or it's not within the scope of science. Ideally, you have a scientist philosopher who does it. If not, thousands
So
and
what
thousands.
you just say, like,
Same thing for engineering.
So
Like, what happens when it becomes cheap enough that kids, like teenagers, can figure out how to start running whatever the hell it's called.
a crime?
No.
That's what I would make it. Yes, absolutely, a crime.
Genetic. You start making your own viruses, literal viruses, right?
Yes,
Or
I know.
like your own
I
bacteria.
saw that. Like, obviously, that becoming more widespread, as in like you can start like with CRISPR and so on like that. Like, it's so much cheaper and easier to genetically modify already existing material and so on. Yeah, a crime. Yeah, absolutely. We make that shit criminal, like ASAP. We restrict the technology and we punish those who have it.
In Jurassic Park, right?
Oh no, they're coming after me now.
Honestly, I would absolutely do that. And then the issue is like whether we could police it, and that's just even worse. And then it's like, well, are we? Like, is someone entitled? It's like when it's like, okay, you can buy a bong, but if you're caught buying weed, then it's a crime. It's like, right, well, you've been buying a lot of telescopes, like microscopes, there, John.
Yeah.
Like this is looking awfully dodgy now.
I mean, it's potentially more dangerous than a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, easily.
For those wondering, it's one of them is known as the Blue Brain Project, and they've actually managed to get at least 37 million connections from 36,000 rat brain cells, which is essentially a functioning rat brain, right? Which is, I had no idea they were anywhere near this close because it was so complicated to do. They've managed to do it, which is mental.
Yeah, I think they should just stop. But I think it's the value. Look, if this was a human brain, I think that these issues would instantly be, we would consider anthropocentrically that this was disgusting and wrong. But because it's not human, we consider it justified, which is the limitation of our ethics. I think that this research right now will be like how we talk about medical research that was performed upon black people in the 30s. Like where we go, I cannot believe that they would deliberately discover which black people had syphilis and then offer them medical treatment to watch the development of syphilis in those populations, whilst not treating it. Like when we look upon that historical kind of catastrophe, that ethical catastrophe, at the time, arguably it was ethical for those scientists to be doing that, as in the limits of their ethical institutions. Well, it wasn't actually, because I think anyone who was engaged in ethics would have saw that as wrong. But the scientists themselves, in terms of what would it be, the ethical norms and conventions of society rather than actual ethics, would have been performing the mandate, or within the mandate that they were taught as children and that was expected of them as scientists. And I think that it's tragic, I think, how long it takes society to catch up with things like ethics and philosophy, in terms of, I would say that especially in terms of online debate. I mean, online debate actually could have regressed 1,000 years, but in terms of ethics is society, I would say that McIntyre's about right, where the ethics of our society enacts the philosophy of about 100 years ago. And I would say that the average everyday individual is engaged in usually a form of ethics that's at least 100 years old. And I think that's...
I mean, you get Marx causing all sorts of ruckus, and now you're not teaching kids philosophy.
Yeah, this is it. Like, imagine not teaching kids. Imagine not teaching kids philosophy. It's like, why are we not teaching kids philosophy though? Like, what value? Like, why wouldn't we even teach kids the basis of ethics, or the most fundamental, even critical thinking? It's
ideally, and well, it definitely happens, but ideally it happens somewhat explicitly in your English classes, in your language arts classes, because you use books as hypothetical ethical situations.
Yeah. So we've got kids learning, ethics in relation to literature and in relation to culture, which is great. To be entirely honest with you, I believe that it should be culturally instantiated. It just makes everything more approachable and understandable. Like if you pick up something I don't know, I don't know, like a sci-fi novel like Dune or something like that, and you start understanding the philosophy of that's great, like, you know. But at the same time, I think that there's very, like, understanding the argumentation and that inspired the literature would be even better. But, you know, like, I have no problem with people learning ethics in terms of, like, culturally and within their institutions. I would argue that's where it exists. But, like, it's just a deeper appreciation for their institutions and the understanding of the ethics and the rules themselves would, I think, and just give the institutions themselves essentially a boost, like a fast forward. You know, they would progress all the better if people were engaged in philosophy.
I mean, that's the hard thing with teaching, right? Is engagement. I mean, especially when we're talking kids, right?
Yeah.
My aunt, my teacher's full of English, or my family's full of English teachers. Like I said, I'm hiding out COVID, so I work from home. Like I'm fine money-wise, but I decided to go live with my parents who live in rural North Carolina until the shit's over. So I go downstairs and I just hear my mom teaching her kids stuff. And today was like, so I want you guys to like practice for the next day, thinking about when is it good to make time for yourself versus when is it not. And my talking about the cultural norms, my aunt's an English teacher as well, her sister, and she did her thesis, it turns out, on how Harry Potter affects the moral development of young boys, which I thought was cool as fuck. Also explained a lot of why she read and talked about Harry Potter so much with me. Like,
what was the conclusion of that? How much does Harry Potter affect the moral development of young boys?
She thought substantially. She can't find the thesis, so I haven't actually read it. It's her master's thesis. But so we have things like that. And then if we're interested, in localization of culture, we could potentially say that maximizing a certain variety, and this isn't going to be a lock solid statement, but the more different scenarios that you get and different solutions to those scenarios that you expose somebody, the more hypotheticals that they can weigh against each other to find what might be optimal, or at least optimal from what they can, from what they feel.
Interesting. I think that it's interesting. I think what I would even say, like, obviously, the hypotheticals are interesting in general. Like, obviously, understanding hypotheticals itself, obviously, it like grows exponentially, as you say. Like, obviously, weighing hypotheticals against each other and so on. But I guess what I would say is, like, I would say, like, myths contain an understanding of reality itself and how we should approach it in terms of our dispositional states, in terms of our valuations in the world, norms and conventions, and understanding, behavior. And Harry Potter has those just as much as, like, any other myth and any other even religious text in general. I think that the issue is that, like, when we have the myths, but we don't have the conversation about the myths, we don't ever understand whether the myths themselves are true. And it's like, it's kind of like the Greeks were engaged in ethics in relation very much so to the Homeric stories, right? Like the Odyssey had a profound effect upon the ethics and understanding of the average Greek.
Yeah, Socrates will quote Hesiod in the Symposium as canon, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, good point." It's like, yeah, well, the poet says blah blah blah.
Exactly. They took it as something that is valuable and gives insight into the world, right? And even that, like, at the time, like, if, like, for example, one of the understandings of, let's say, like, something like Gorgias, for example, in was done by Plato, or just to talk about, like, Socrates himself. Socrates, a lot of the time, relied upon a differentiation between words. Like, for example, what came into question was agathos, very much so, because the Greek culture at the time of Socrates were engaged in, like, a cultural kind of mixing with, like, other nation states. And they realized that, look, their understanding of good was being pulled into question, but then they had different understandings in terms of language with other evaluative concepts. So Socrates sometimes had to, like, fall back on concepts which were non-culturally dependent, right? Like, as in, like,
yeah, he defines shape and color to Meno.
Yeah, this is the thing. So and this is why there's this constant perpetuation for the universal, and this is obviously they're building up when obviously Aristotle's building down and obviously looking for that thing that which is irreducible. And I think both are incredibly valuable and are in a hermeneutic relationship. And if we teach kids, like, look, when you approach these stories, try and understand whether the story is right or not, but then understanding, if you do agree with that story, that it has implications towards obviously your life and how you should change your life, and then that again will entail a modification. And this is the constant reconceptualization in relation to reality. And don't get me wrong, I think all of this happens without philosophy, as in you do not need a philosopher who is analyzing this all and commenting on it on a meta level to talk about. I just think that philosophy helps remove dogmatism and helps remove ways of thinking which would take otherwise twice as long to remove, because it very well may be the case that individuals who are non-philosophical would work out thesis, antithesis, synthesis, in relation to problem solving. The issue, in any time, the issue is when they're not engaged in philosophy, they may be using a methodology which is less capable of doing so. And that's really, I'd say, the benefit of philosophy is just speeding up the process, refining the process of ethics, and then obviously, which is why ethics, I would say, is further ahead than culture in terms of the conclusions the ethics professors draw.
I've been explicitly or non-explicitly perpetuating the idea recently of philosopher. So we have philosopher qua philosopher, the same way that we have engineer qua engineer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I like the idea of philosopher as a role, right? So right now I would be playing the role of an employee, except our database is down, so there's nothing I can do, hence why I'm here. But then I can play the role of a lover when I'm with my SO, or I can, etc., right? And so even without being a proper philosopher, we can approach things as philosophers, even if we aren't, right? So it's okay, we're in 4th grade and we're reading A Wrinkle in Time. Let's analyze this as philosophers. And it'd be very interesting if teachers actually explicitly gave the vocabulary. Kids are typically probably not going to be as interested in background, but there's a lot of sneaky ways to throw that in there. Like you were saying with understanding where the ethics come from. And I think as gamification becomes more of a thing, my mom just gave her kids assignments. Their assignment right now is to play 30 minutes of this game. And it's not even Leapfrog or Math Blaster. It's Clash of Clans. It's not a gamified education system. It's a game that uses education as themes, since games have themes, right? And as we see that more and more, and the ability to hypothetically be in scenarios where children have to choose ethical dilemmas for themselves, I think that'll be really neat.
No, I agree. And I think that obviously the way that a game theory as well allows an individual to understand that they're interacting with another, especially when it's another player. And we can even show the difference between how you approach an NPC game and the way that you approach obviously having multiple players implies your understanding of those players. And so people get an understanding of communal social ethics, and rather than just an individual responsibility, and how we should approach group responsibility and things like that, which would be interesting in and of itself. How do what is our responsibility together, and what happens when the leader of the group says that we should do this? Do I follow that, or do I contradict the group itself? And what is my value relationship with the group, and that group's value relationship with reality, and so on, which is obviously just a whole a definite issue that we have in society. We have people that are unwilling to follow anything, trying to instantiate their own authority above others, and we have other individuals who are so agreeable that they will commit atrocity. And obviously understanding what is the rational position of an individual within a group, and how we should approach groups in the first place, and how we should approach things like authority, and especially in terms of ethical authority, would be unbelievably valuable in my children. You know what I mean? Understanding if I was a soldier, when it would be appropriate to defy an order, is a question that I think we could definitely do with answering.
They actually do have an interest. So, I grok the spirit of what you're saying, but just as a side tangent, I forget which of my buddies. One of my buddies was talking about how he actually had an instance where the I don't know the ranks, right? But the higher ranking officer told one of his buddies, one of my friend's buddies, to do XYZ. And his buddy was like, "Sir, I'm sorry, I can't do that. That's an illegal order, sir." And then, we'll say the captain. I don't know the ranks, but captain was like, "Okay, all right, good point," and just moved on. And I was like, "That's so cool."
That's
cool
exactly that is
happened.
actually great. Yeah, an appeal to like the spirit of the law and the lawfulness that exists in the concept of what an order can and can't be. That's brilliant. I actually really love that. That's how it should be, though. Absolutely. It's like it's that famous Star Trek episode, isn't it? Like, I'm saying famous. I'm a nerd, so I know like all of them. There's that Star Trek episode where Data is given an order by Captain Picard, and he actively defies it. And he goes to await punishment, and he says, "I'm willing to accept punishment for disobeying an order." And he's like, "Well, you're not getting a punishment. You're getting a commendation." The Starfleet don't want captains who blindly follow orders. Too many atrocities have been committed because of that, and that is I think how we would be approaching these things. And honestly, I think that maybe it's like 90% of my ethics may come from Star Trek, and maybe that's why I'm using
a bunch of thought experiments, right? A bunch of thought experiments to examine
that, and it's basically just upper stage communism. Arguably, because it's just a society without scarcity.
So I say, if there's scarcity economy, then you can do whatever you want.
Well, that's the thing. But then as well, like obviously the ethical development is beyond anything that is like honestly like I think Gene Roddenberry like he clearly read philosophy as well because if you've watched the series, I'm such a fucking Star Trek nerd. I hate this. I don't want to reveal me true power level. But essentially there's a show that was called Andromeda, which was made of like offcuts of Star Trek and the script, and one of the races in that show is called Nietzscheans, and they're actually a colony of humans that live by the philosophy of Nietzsche and have like genetically engineered themselves to become to attempt to become like the Ubermensch and stuff. It's absolutely class. And it's honestly, it's just amazing, like how much philosophy is genuinely in Star Trek, especially the Next Generation. Like it's just constantly like Shakespeare and like thought experiments and all that good stuff. It's great. Like honestly, just nerded out at this point. Like, but yeah, I think obviously like I do love the example of the soldier disobeying an order because it would be an illegal order, and it's like exactly like there is a lawfulness which governs our actions, which governs hierarchy and the way that hierarchy functions in the first place, and that is even like a Lockean principle. Like the legislators are held to the legislation.
I have an idea that I like to toy around. Now, granted, it's not feasible at all, but it's. I like to say I'm a theorist. It's not my job to build the thing. I come up with an idea and then let the engineers and the geometrists do that part. But it is cool to come up with ideas and then hey, if this would be useful if it magically happened, well, let's like find principles that could. But in terms of like what you were just saying, I think it'd be cool if we had. So the U.S. has 3 branches of government, right, which are intended to have a balance of powers to distribute things. You have the executive branch. Well, let's go in order of how it works. So you have the legislative branch, right? That's Congress, and they write the laws. And then you have the judicial branch. Those are the judges. So if I am accused of breaking X law, the judges don't decide whether it's a law. The judges just, interpret whether I am guilty or not of that. So the judges can't make law, and that's a big deal. Only the legislative branch can. Mm-hmm. Then we have the executive branch. That's your cops. That's the president's the head of that and all that. Their job is to enforce the laws, right? And that's why, like, if a cop kills somebody, arguments that the person was breaking the law don't work, because the only reason a cop could theoretically kill somebody is in self-defense, the same reason that I could. Because if they don't, then they're acting as the judicial branch. Mm-hmm. So that's why cops need to get a warrant to break into your house. And because they have to go to the judicial branch for that. And I think it would be cool if we had maybe a 4th branch, or if I can borrow from Thermo and just say a 0th branch, the axiomatic branch, where we have a branch that decides what outcomes we want laws to have. So we vote on people and we vote on policies for what outcomes we want.
But
then
that's
the legislative branch's job is to create laws to induce those outcomes.
That is essentially the role of the Constitution, though, isn't it?
It's intended to be, but I mean, outcomes in a maybe less meta sense. Suppose it's like, okay, we want unemployment to be below 5%,
Mm.
and it's not. And it's like, okay, well, you guys need to make laws and policies to do that. Okay,
Well, I think
and then they say, okay, well, we're doing this to accomplish this goal. Blah,
You see,
blah, blah.
I would definitely say go meta. I'd go meta, because the reason I would say is like, look, the function of this society, like if we start trying to change the society in relation, all right, or we're trying to change the rules to match the consequences, then we're going to lose the foundation of the rules. What we do is we understand the consequences, and then we understand what can and cannot be a rule. And that, I mean, in and of itself, I would say that, like, I'm a threshold deontologist, and I'm actually Hegelian, so I'm actually misleading you when I say that. Really, it's just the easiest way of putting it across. And so I'd say that the understanding of the rules.
I don't know any of the.
Oh, right,
I've read lots of philosophers, but I don't know any of those schools.
Oh, it's okay. Basically, all I'm going to say is, like, essentially an understanding of what is valuable itself runs through the reasoning of our institutions and how we're evaluating. So our duties are actually what informs us a lot of the time, essentially, of what we should want and why. And that's essentially like Hegel saying, like, the law purifies our desires, right? I would say that it is that society should work bottom up in this sense, in a hermeneutic relationship in which, individuals elect officials to enact what they have seen, like the way that institutions should change, or the way that the institution of like culture should change, enact that upon them, live within that culture, and then obviously reevaluate and reconceptualize it, and then apply it again. The issue I think that happens in most states is, one, the legislators have nothing to do. Like the people, like the lawmakers, have nothing to do with. I say the lawmakers. Obviously, I'd say that the lawmakers have nothing to do with the people, and the institutions below them. It's all like top to bottom. We constitute the foundations of the society, and we act it out. In the United States, it's even worse because it's constitutional. It's like, right, a couple of hundred years ago, some lawmakers passed some laws. Now we're going to institute what they wanted in relation to you, without evaluating whether what they wanted was right or not in the first place. And so you've kind of still being governed from 250 years ago.
That's the idea of the amendment process, right?
Yeah, exactly.
However, it's all talk unless it actually happens.
But even as well with the amendments, it seems that it's almost a disgruntled process, because if you amend it so much, well, there's the Constitution, the same thing. It's like, I agree that, like, you should be able to have a Constitution which is, and I think I agree with this with the Cosmic Skeptic actually, that you should have a Constitution which you can reform, like whether like at any given point. And I think that it's like, yeah, they take the Constitution as it is and create secondary laws from that. But obviously, you're going to have to hit the meta level and just say, like, look, we are going to have to consider constitutional change. And that shouldn't be like an arduous, awful process where we all cry that we've destroyed our culture. But what about the Second Amendment, foundation? It's like, look, understand what is genuinely good and valuable in relation to society and the expression of the duties that we have in society today. And if that is being, if there is a contradiction in the way that the Constitution is enabling the institutions to, like, evolve and function, and the institutions themselves are doing so in relation to the good that was presupposed in the Constitution, which is arguably the equality between, all individuals and so on, then the Constitution must change in order to enact its own values. And so you have this constantly modifying process. But unfortunately, it's I think it is just a bit of a... I would definitely go meta with it. I just think it needs to be a lot easier in the United States, and a lot easier in Britain as well. At least in the United States, I think that in the United States, the Constitution has saved a lot of issues. I mean, like, even with the recent Trump issues that I saw, with the Capitol riots, it seemed that the Republicans and the Democrats really only agree on the Constitution, and so it's
the source code.
Exactly. So it was just it for what, like, all of them were like, look, this is unconstitutional and therefore it is wrong, and it's like, oh, thank fuck.
It comes back down to that thing you were talking about earlier of just maybe a more meta version of that foundational thing that we can agree upon, or at least come back to as a frame.
Exactly. There has to be a grounding of our normativity from which to like kind of direct the process. Obviously, I don't think that it necessarily has to be such a like Britain technically has a constitution in a way that is unwritten. Like people talk about this unwritten or rather like not unwritten constitution, an codified constitution in the sense that it's a collection of prior cases and past like cases and so on that is usually used to like precedents that exactly that basically give the foundation of the development of British law, whether it would be considered okay. And I think that obviously can be the case as well. I think the constitution is just a very like codified version of it. But yeah, I'm actually gonna have to shoot off like now pretty much. So I'm just gonna shoot off here and then just round me stream up. But I've really appreciated the conversations with everyone, and I hope you've had a nice time. And obviously,
likewise.
Don't mean to cut you off. Obviously, I'm just gonna have to bounce. But thanks again. Like I really hope you've had a nice time, and thank you both for some like crazy insights. Really, some very interesting stuff.
Likewise. All right, peace out. I'm actually gonna bounce too.
Oh, and just to say thank you to Arthuria as well. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Perspective. I always really appreciate your debates. They're always extremely interesting, and thank you again for putting up with that dude earlier. You're awesome.
Oh, it's no problem. And anyone who's watching the stream, remember you can join Arthuria with the link in the description. It's a great server, and obviously, as you can see, if you are worried about trolling in debates, you can have moderation, which will prevent that. So even that alone, I think, is at least evidenced of the good faith of the Arthurian, medium. But thanks again, everyone, and take it easy. Okay, so I'm gonna bounce, guys. I've got to go off. But I hope you've all appreciated the discussion. So yeah, just to inform everyone who's been keeping up to date with the channel. Obviously, I am having tech issues. I don't know if the camera's been flickering as much this time, but it is very tentative. I Googled the issue. Apparently, it's an internal issue within the camera. So I'm going to be forced to buy a new camera if I can collect the money. And, I'm going to have to put, obviously, some money into that. So if you want to help fund the purchase of a new camera, which I'm going to have to do pretty soon, like pretty immediately, you can do so by tipping via the tip jar in the description or donating via the Streamlabs donation link. Anything helps, and I really appreciate your support, whether it's purely through viewership or through donation. Either way, I really appreciate just being able to make this content for you guys. So thank you very much for watching. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and as always,